There's a particular type of hangover that comes with nights like last night. And with the namesake of this show, we'll call it the come down era. The old MMA world keeps collapsing in our peripheral, and the new one is still running on a system check. UFC Rio wasn't just a typical fight night card. It felt like the past was haunting the present. On the marquee, we had Oliveira, Figueiredo, Luque, fighters that once guaranteed chaos. Now reads like a ledger of survival, reinvention, and ultimately, in some cases, decline. Rio used to be a cathedral, Aldo leg kicks ringing like church bells, Nogueira stitching miracles out of near death, Anderson Silva turning geometry into witchcraft. Back then, the crowd wasn't just watching a sport, they were watching belief manifest as violence. Brazil wasn't just a location for a fight card, it was a feeling in itself. If the fight was in Rio, the line bent around the madness. You didn't fade the variance, you wrote it. But that world doesn't really exist anymore. The modern fight game is now a machine that eats that myth and spits out models. Rio isn't chaos as much as it's collaboration, and the data says that the machine still works. Favorites went 8-4 last night. The unders hit in 8 of 12 fights, going for 6.64 units profit. Fight goes the distance no, cashed in 3 of 12 fights for 5.3 units profit. It was order disguised as entropy, a carnival converted into a spreadsheet. Yet Rio resists total quantification because there's always something the numbers can't price in. The humidity, the sound that the crowd makes when an old honored MMA ghost exhales. Even a split decision here feels cosmically assigned because when Charles Oliveira walks forward, shoulders squared, chin high, you realize that there's no metric, no line movement, no parlay leg that's going to capture what it means to refuse that entropy. And that's what makes this moment so strange because the myth of Brazil has kind of been flattened, but not wholly erased. Brazil is still used to symbolize the uncontrollable in this sport. Now it's a proof that the chaos can learn discipline. The carnival can become a laboratory. The crowd can still roar, but the outcomes look like math instead of miracles. Still, UFC Rio bent the patterns without breaking them. The unders cashed, only 3 fights went the distance, and as for the Brazilian magic, it flickered in some cases, with Oliveira brightly, with Figueiredo quietly and calmly, with Luque like a faint echo. And it's not a tragedy either. It's the natural order. Every fighter eventually stops asking, can I win? It starts asking, can I still be who I once was? And I feel like that question hung over so many fights on this card. Oliveira, the people's champion who could never be stripped of that essence. Figueiredo, the god of war, turned into a decision machine. Vicente Luque, the MMA brawler who's seemingly run out of chin before he's run out of courage. These guys aren't fighting opponents as much as they're fighting time and their own legacies, right? And if you've been watching MMA long enough, you can feel it. You can feel the last glimmers of that generation that built modern MMA. The old guard shows what happens when chaos burns just a little bit too long. And beneath them, the new generation learns how to weaponize efficiency. Well, Oliveira, Figueiredo, and Luque carried their legacies in different ways than others. The new wave of MMA fighters on this card carried the market, reversing the very trends that build their predecessors. We saw Polastri's TKO reminding us that strawweight favorites aren't cursed as much as we think they are. 19-6 on the year. Beatriz Mosquito became the prototype of the new early career finisher. Joel Alvarez, the anti-Luque, proved that size, youth, and cardio now beat nostalgia 9 times out of 10. And Vitor Petrino kept the heavyweight law of physics intact, which is favorites winning 73% of the time since 2021. So even in chaos, we see a business plan. And that's the inversion here. The new generation cashes, flushing the zone, while the veterans are breaking away. The next generation doesn't mythologize itself, it optimizes itself. And they're not as much chasing legacy as they are perfecting probability. But still, humanity bleeds through the algorithm, whether it's Charles Oliveira smiling through the scar tissue, Davison Figueiredo crying as the scorecards are read, Vicente Luque staring at the floor blankly like he's watching his own career fade away. These are the images that linger when the odds are completely forgotten. Betting becomes nothing but a memory. Every unit, a tombstone. Every ticket, a trophy. And maybe that's what nights like UFC Rio are about. Book and the myth kind of coming together and shaking hands. The crowd screams, the model adjusts, and somewhere between them, the sport keeps evolving. The myth of Brazil isn't dead, it's just been domesticated in a way. That chaos that we're so used to now moves in patterns, but the heartbeat very much still remains. Because every so often, the sport still breaks its own script. Oliveira takes down Gamrot like gravity stopped working. Figueiredo wins a split that probably should have been unanimous, and Vicente Luque loses badly, but still finds a way to be a part of this story. And the math bends just enough to remind everyone that this sport isn't just about data, it's about blood. And when the lights fade and the crowd disperses, what's left are those numbers. What really hums is the memory, is our memory, because units, props, these are just little columns of green and red. They're tombstones and trophies. Each one is kind of just a tiny monument to a night that mattered in its moment, but as time passes, to many of us, it just becomes a data point. But to so many more, it becomes a memorable thing that just like makes us fall in love with the sport all over again. And that's why we keep watching, because deep down, we're not just betting on fights. We're betting on the persistence of meaning and how much we enjoy consuming this. Because on the chance that somewhere between the algorithm and the face the pain intro, someone's going to make us feel the way that Aldo once did. So yeah, we'll call it the come down era of MMA. And on this night, the gods of Brazilian MMA got a little bit older. The books got a little bit smarter. And at the end of the day, the chaos that we've come to expect from a Brazil card more and more gets priced into the line rather than coming as some type of shock or surprise. But again, on this night, the ghosts of Rio still dance. And it all started with Julia Polastri because, as I said, with Julia Polastri, Bia Mosquito, Vitor Petrino, and in a different sense, Mario Pinto, these are four fighters, four data points, but very much the same overlying theme. It's the next generation that doesn't chase chaos, they monetize it. They're the products of a system that learned to weaponize the chaos they were forged out of. Julia Polastri, great example of this, comes in at minus 500, did exactly what she was supposed to do, walked into Rio and absolutely dismantled Karolina Kowalkiewicz with surgical precision and shut the lights off with a head kick and follow-up punches at 256 of round 3. No panic, no dump, no drama, just pure execution. Polastri fights like someone that's very much born after this division has figured itself out. Like the product of the Nama Yunus, Wiley Zhang generation, not the Claudia Gadelha, Jessica Andrade, brawler era. Her game is geometry, clean angles, measured pressure, and a balance that has never really betrayed her. She doesn't chase chaos. She really much enforces her will over it. And as far as Karolina Kowalkiewicz, I mean, she fought bravely, but it was like watching dial-up try to load 4K. Like the sports clock kept ticking and she stayed frozen in time, which is very much a great way to explain maybe where she's at in her MMA career at the current moment. And it's pretty funny because like for many years, we talked about it on this channel before, the women's strawweight division, women's flyweight division, the lighter women's weight divisions is very much where logic went to die. Like the chaos divisions in MMA were definitely this, like the gambler's coin toss, chalk got chewed up and spit out time and time again. The underdogs barked, the close decisions piled up, and the betting favorite was very much taking the wrong side of many women's strawweight fights over the years. But those days are gone because since the start of 2022, strawweight favorites are 87 and 42 overall, 46 and 17 since the start of last year, 19 and 6 in 2025, which is already good for 2.7 units. The chaos hasn't really disappeared. It's just been domesticated. Because if you look at with the finishes in this division are trending towards order as well. 10 of 25 women's strawweight fights in 2025 have ended inside the distance, almost 40% for nearly 6 units of profit. And that isn't fluke variance. It's the structural correction, right? As more and more favorites are winning, they're winning with ease and they're getting finishes. Whereas before, when it was closer, when there was more variance in this division, there was more closer fights that were going the distance. That has kind of shifted away, where the cream is rising to the top, and the math now is finally reflecting it. What used to be some of the wildest weight classes in women's MMA has now turned more and more clinical, with these divisions that once made gamblers sweat are now where sharp money seems to feel safest. And Polastri, in this instance, didn't just beat an aging veteran, she confirmed that market shift in real time. This chaos division has become more and more mechanical, efficient, algorithmic, and the myth and the spectacle has finally caught up to the math, which again, very much a theme of this card. Next came Bia Mosquito, who honestly made Irina Alekseeva look like a first week white belt, basically at best. Rear naked choke, round 2, 2 minutes and 14 seconds into the second round. The moment she got her hooks in, the fight wasn't just over, it was basically resolved, like it was a foregone conclusion. There's a difference, like you could see in her face. No surge, no chaos, no mercy, just control. Mosquito really, as a decorated jiu-jitsu player, doesn't fight like someone trying to survive in MMA despite being low experience. She fights like someone who's trying to impose her will on the fight and who already knows the outcome and is calmly trying to walk everybody there, including her opponent. And obviously, again, that's not an accident. It's an evolution of the sport, an evolution of this division. And something that I noticed, like for years, women's bantamweight was the slowest division in the sport. The one where you bet on the over and just forgot about it until Bruce Buffer announced the winner. Since 2020, the over has hit at an absurd 72 in 2022 record for 11.64 units profit. The favorites in this division have rolled at 66 and 28 for just under 5 units profit. It's been a chalk grinder's dream, 3-round decisions, a methodical pace, no risk, and this division has very much become a kind of a crucial safe space for profitability, predictability, and utterly devoid of violence and danger. But again, 2025 feels different. Of the 14 women's bouts that have been official, 6 have gone under the betting total, finishing inside the distance, turning the under into a rare winner at 6 and 8 for 3 units after last night. Not domination, but a reversion to chaos, the kind of chaos that's been gone for far too long. And Bia Mosquito is definitely at the center of that shift. She's the prototype for this new model of women's MMA fighter, Brazilian women's MMA fighter nonetheless. Not reckless, not romantic, but just ruthlessly efficient. Her submission in this fight wasn't an outlier, could be served as a data point. And with someone like Bia Mosquito, shorter career, higher finishing rate, less damage, more money. We've seen the fight goes distance when it's lined at plus 150 odds or higher this year, has hit at about a 50% rate. A lot of the time when we're not expecting a finish in this division, we're getting one because, the fighters at the top of this division know what they're doing. They use systems. They're not brawlers. They fight to hit their metrics, not hit the myth of their legacy or whatever. And yet it doesn't feel sterile. Like there's still something chilling and beautiful about the way that Bia Mosquito closes the distance, the way that she traps limbs before her opponent is able to even catch up. You still see that old Brazilian spirit, right? Submissions and blood, but it's streamlined through this new era. Violence as a discipline. And the old guard of women's bantamweight, many of them fought like survivalists. The new wave at the very top, they're fighting like engineers. A lot of tape study, a lot of reading the division, and a lot of building yourself for the scope of the division at the moment. And it is a division that once looked like it lived on the clock, is now very much reclaiming the finish, not through just wild chaos either, through calibration. And Mosquito, she really isn't the storm that broke through the gate. She's very much just like the quiet hum of the machine that has replaced it. Every strike, every takedown is very measured. Every squeeze, like every submission attempt, highly optimized. She's not emotional in there. She's just inevitable. For years, the women's bantamweight division in the UFC was about time to wait out Amanda Nunes, time for the division to shake itself out. And now, finally, for a handful of these up-and-comers at 135, it's about timing. And via Mosquito, she's very much a part of that equation, and her rise to the top of this division is pretty much inevitable, in my opinion. And speaking of inevitable, if you want to see what inevitability looks like, I would suggest watching Vitor Petrino at minus 240 knock out Thomas Peterson 26 seconds into round number 3. You could have probably called it after the first exchange. The pace, the pressure, the slow crush of, like what I said, inevitability. And that's just who Petrino is. He doesn't fight with momentum. Like you see, he looks like he's constantly frustrated. He looks like he's trying to piece together his skills and his game plan. His momentum it's just the spirit of the fight for him. Like every step that he takes feels very much like preordained. The cage is like slanting towards his opponent, and you just can't stop gravity when he gets going. And that's just like how he fights. It's inevitability with gloves on. And that's very much how the UFC heavyweight division is right now. Like what was at one point the most chaotic division in the sport has turned into one of the most predictable ones. Since 2021, the heavyweight favorites are 118-43. They've cashed at a 73% win rate for 16 units profit. And the numbers don't lie. The monsters that are supposed to win. But the thing is here, there's a pattern that I've started to see for a while, and it's been kind of hard to articulate unless you've been watching for a long time and looking at these numbers. The UFC heavyweight division is extremely top heavy in every sense. The top 5 of the division are killers. The rest, it's just exponentially chasmic. And even inside the top 15, the drop off is just huge with skill, composure, fight IQ. All of it just nosedives. So when you see a big line, when the chalk is heavy, it's usually because it's justified. The gap is real. But when the line tightens, when it's minus 150 or closer, what I continuously call a coin flip, that's when things start to get weird. That's when the entropy of this division starts to creep back in. And look at the data. Since 2022, heavyweight favorites are 88-34. That's about a 70% clip. But if you zoom in on what I call the coin flip fights, which are those matchups where the favorite closes at minus 150 or better, the underdogs have actually won more than not for quite a while, because that's the sweet spot. That's where the illusion of order breaks in this division, because at heavyweight, 50-50 isn't even. It's tilted towards chaos. And 2025 is proving this again. A perfect example of this, you see it in the numbers. Heavyweight favorites, 7-8 this year, but 5 of those 23 fights were coin flips, and 3 of those fights have gone to the dog. And so that's not just background noise, that's gravity doing what it does best, pulling everything back to the mean. And that's exactly what we saw at UFC Rio. Petrino wasn't a coin flip. He was a law of physics. You could feel it the second that they touched gloves. He, not in the most pretty way, but he suffocated Peterson. He broke him, and then he flatlined him 26 seconds into round 3. Chalk doing what Chalk's supposed to do at heavyweight, and order restored. But then came Mario Pinto at plus 120 against João Diniz, and it was like watching the other half of the formula play out in real time. Close line, even power, even capability, and what happens? The dog cashes. And again, this isn't just random, right? Like Pinto didn't win because of luck, right? He won because he's a part of that new breed that I was talking about. He's patient, composed, and efficient, forged out of the chaos that the sport was created out of. And Diniz came to brawl, and Pinto very much came to confirm the pattern. That you could see it in the way that he picked his shots, the way he refused to just swing wildly. Everything he did was calculated. And 4 minutes and 10 seconds into round number 2, it wasn't an accident. It's this thesis statement that I've been working on in the heavyweight division for decades. Heavyweight has been this casino of MMA in the UFC. You walked in, you threw a quarter on someone throwing a haymaker and hoped that the lights went out. And for a really long time, it worked. But now we're starting to get, like everything else, logic and order is starting to supplant nuance. And obviously power still rules, but it's power managed by process. And the smart money doesn't really chase chaos anymore in this division. It prices it. And Petrino, again, embodies that new inevitability, the favorite who does what favorites are supposed to do. Pinto represents the exception of that rule played out in real time, the underdog who wins because it was a close fight. It was a coin flip fight, and you should pick the dog, pick the plus money side every single time. Or at least, if you're not even thinking about it in that sense, pick the fighter who has less of a percentage to win on like the board of public opinion. The underdog wins because it's a close fight, and the measure of expectation is it's going to be on the favorite every single time in that position, which is why you need to be on the dog. And they're not opposites. They're the same pattern. It's just from different angles. So in the future, when I tell you to keep an eye on coin flip fights at heavyweight, I mean it. And I hope you pay attention. If the betting line is wide, trust the chalk trend. Trust the force of that gravity. If the betting line is close, again, take the plus money and don't blink, because heavyweight isn't random anymore. It's chaos, but it is a ritualized, optimized chaos. And like all rituals, it rewards the ones who understand the sequence, and it pays off to understand the trends. And that's why you're watching. And so across all four of these fights, this narrative that I've been talking about, it didn't just unfold, it computed. Like every punch, every choke, every KO is a proof of concept. The chaos that we're used to, when the UFC goes on the road to places like Rio, has been mapped, charted, and sold back to us with now like predictable margins. We're going to get to the part of this card where, the theme shifted to the old guard fighting to survive the storm. But this part was more about the new breed building weather systems. In the instance of these four fights, you weren't gambling on volatility. The volatility was being manufactured. The math isn't behind the violence anymore in many of these cases. The math is the violence. And Polastri made women's strawweight favorites feel holy again, clean and absolute. Mosquito showed that a finish can be engineered, not prayed for, in the women's bantamweight division. Petrino turned the inevitability of chalk cashing in heavyweight into spectacle, gravity-wearing gloves, as I said, and Pinto, patient and unbothered, reminded us that even the underdog is a part of the system, just on the other side of the coin. And across all of these divisions, the signal was the same: order out of chaos, markets catching up to the myth and the spectacle of Brazil and of the UFC as a whole. Brazil used to give us saints and sinners, and now it gives us surgeons and syntax errors. The wildness hasn't died, it's just been optimized. And this is the come down era, fighting in the age of collapse. The MMA gods stopped roaring and started calculating, and every fight card and every matchup, we see a spreadsheet soaked in adrenaline. Every finish, a formula disguised as public catharsis. It is the new generation of MMA not chasing chaos, as I said, monetizing it, optimizing it. And somewhere in the data, beneath the odds and the units and the closing lines, you do still feel the ghosts of Rio thrashing against the code, begging the algorithm to bleed and just waiting to be sacrificed to the skull gods, which we'll get into in a second. The next thing that I wanted to talk about really has nothing to do with the sports betting results or anything like that, but it's definitely worth talking about because Lucas Almeida stepped into UFC Rio carrying far more than the weight of expectations because he entered with a broken hand. The swelling was obvious. It basically looked like someone had inflated a rubber glove full of gravel. Like he lifted it once during the weigh-ins, flinched, and the entire MMA world could tell immediately that that hand was done, cooked, useless. And yet the fight went on because in this sport, nothing stops the show. From the opening exchange, it was very clear that Almeida was fighting with one weapon missing and the other barely holding on. He tried to keep a poker face, but every punch was telling the truth. Michael Aswell picked up on it right away. He stayed, props to him. He stayed patient. He was circling, testing range, waiting for that inevitable opening, a jab, a step right, and then the kill shot. The fight was over in 1 minute and 42 seconds. Almeida never threw the broken hand once. He couldn't. He just took damage until gravity did its job. And, the crowd was cheering him on out of just their ignorance and, for the support for the Brazilian. What we were all really watching was a guy with a shattered hand getting sent back to the ER for another round of x-rays. And the saddest part about this is that everybody knew that something was wrong. His corner knew, the commission knew, the broadcast crew knew, the people watching, like the media knew outside of the UFC media, but the people who claim to be advocates for the fighters, journalists, they knew. Nobody does anything. Obviously, like, what are you going to do? People need to get paid, but it's just a sad state of affairs because you can't stop it, because stopping it would mean pulling the plug on the content, which is the holy grail at this point, because that's what this is, right? This was content. It is a man risking what is lifelong damage for a paycheck and ultimately a storyline. And like, we can laugh and shake our heads at the absurdity of this, but the way we were all just watching him try to jab with fingers that barely bent, and it was just brutal. Like, and fighting with a hand that swollen isn't just painful, it's extremely dangerous. Like, you can destroy the bones permanently, you can shred tendons, you can crush the nerves. That's the kind of injury that doesn't just end fights, it ends your career. It alters your life. Like, we're talking about the kind of nerve damage that leaves you unable to hold a cup, unable to type, unable to hold a cell phone, unable to ever throw a punch again, unable to possibly hold your child, hold a baby, but to feed your baby, to, change diapers. But none of that matters. What matters is that the cameras keep rolling, because that's what the structure demands. The show must go on no matter who breaks the process. ESPN gets its broadcast, the UFC fills its time slot, DraftKings keeps the bets live, and we, the audience, sit at home and tweet about either how tough this guy is or how ridiculous and how shameful this is. But in the end, it's a guy who's just doing permanent damage to his body at the cost of what? Because when he goes down, it's not just another knockout on his record. It's a guy getting sacrificed to, like, the work schedule. Like, he showed up hurt because pulling out means losing your spot, losing your money, maybe losing your career. And in the end, that's not bravery. That's not toughness. That's doing what you have to do to survive. And anybody else given the same position would do the same thing because they have to. And nobody wants to see that. That's not what we pay to see. We pay to see, we want to be joy. Like, we pay to watch a sport that brings us joy, not makes us depressed, not makes us shake our head. And it's all packaged and edited and sold back to us as if it's like supposed to be inspirational. Even like, apart from the actual UFC, MMA media does themselves a disservice by even covering this if they're not going to talk about it in the future. If they're just going to have this phenomenon where the next week happens and Dana shows up and no one says anything. So yeah, it's all content in the end. But my God, the whole thing was absurd, unprofessional, and immensely depressing. And speaking of absurd, unprofessional, and immensely depressing, Yoel Alvarez cashed as a huge favorite against Vicente Luque via unanimous decision, 30-26 across all three scorecards. And there's a very strange, ominous weight that falls on a fight when what you expect to happen, but don't want to happen, plays out in front of you in real time. Because, like, look, welterweight underdogs have been the story of 2025. The division's volatility baked in that it's become like a gambler's meme, the live dog trend at welterweight. On paper, the math checks out because Luque was being undersold immensely, and Alvarez is being, in his welterweight debut, seemed like he was being overpriced, right? Not to mention, like I said, entering this event, underdogs at 170 pounds, 20 and 24 on the year, returning roughly 21 units if you bet them every single one across the board. And like that's not variance, that's a structural leak in the odds. The house hasn't known how to price chaos, and the chaos has paid dividends in this division. So when Luque walks into Rio as a 4-1 underdog, there's this soft hum under your skin that's, maybe the trends keep barking. Maybe the old dog, the Brazilian violence merchant, had one more brawl left in him, right? Luque's whole brand was being the guy who could take, two to give one, and the guy who could drown you in his own stubbornness. And so I thought maybe he'd cash that nostalgia ticket. But that was hope. That was hope and cope, because the reality was completely different and a very different animal, because Yoel Alvarez comes in calm, calculated, as a -600 favorite, and the dogs don't bark. Alvarez comes in cool as ever, doesn't even break a sweat. He broke the mold though from Jump Street. Alvarez treated this fight like a foregone conclusion. Risk minimized, output optimized, variance neutralized. And he fought like the algorithm had already run the simulation and told him, just execute the plan. It's a foregone conclusion. Very Topuria like. Luque tried to blitz. He threw the old 1-2 hook kick combos, but the edges weren't sharp enough anymore. Alvarez slipped, pivoted, jab. Every exchange landed back in Alvarez's comfort zone. No, we didn't see any of that like classic Luque chaos. No big pocket trades. No vintage Vicente at all. Just Alvarez controlling the fight. By round 2, it was really over spiritually. Alvarez kept him on the fence, never really overextending himself, never falling for the counter. You could see the resignation in Luque's face, the slow bleed of realization that toughness really isn't a strategy anymore in this fight promotion, in this sport, really, especially at his age. And again, we're back at one of these depressing moments. We'll talk about it in a second, but like nobody stops what happens to Luque here. The fight had, at that point, going into the third round, the fight had already turned into anatomy of a lesson in how, skill scalps heart when heart runs out of fuel. And look, there's no way to talk about this fight without mentioning the eye poke debacle in round 1. Luque gets tagged, or maybe it's a grazing poke. The replay is murky, and he immediately signals that I can't see. And I think what happens here, I've seen this happen many times in MMA fights, is when someone gets hit and they like either an orbital bone or cheekbone fracture, some type of eye bone fracture, is that they think that they got eye poked because they're like feeling the inside bone, like touching like eye material, like they're the nerve ending of their eye, but it's really like the bone that's like hitting on the inside of the nerve ending, that it's, and that makes you panic, right? And in that instance, right, based on the MMA rules, it's supposed to be an automatic doctor check, if not a stoppage. Instead, referee Osiris Maya half steps in, half steps out, gives Luque minutes to recover, then lets it continue like it was a routine timeout, which should, if it was a legitimate punch, then it shouldn't have been a timeout. And if Luque couldn't continue, then the fight should have been called. Like we're in, pride exhibition fight territory here. And in no way was this officiating. It was an attempt at crisis management. And no one had any idea what to do. Like every protocol went completely out the window. No doctor's inspection beyond like asking like if he could see, like no actual examination, no thorough like look, just like, do you want to continue? No decisive halt of nothing that would give us the illusion that there was any type of control of the matter here. And the referee's body language, everybody's body language screamed absolute confusion. Like the referee looked like a man trying to remember the last page of the rule book. Well, the world was burning in front of him. And for a ref, you don't have to be a hero. You just have to be consistent. But when you're neither, the sport just turns into pro wrestling. And by the time the second round started, the damage wasn't just physical. The credibility of this fight was completely broken. And that's where it got surreal, because cage side in the broadcast booth, the wheels are completely coming off too. John Gooden tried to keep his composure, threading sentences like a man bailing water with a teaspoon, while Michael Bisping, meanwhile, decided that this was his scene. But I'm actually going to give Bisping a little bit of a leeway here, just because, I got some empathy. And if there's one thing to guarantee to make Michael Bisping completely lose his mind, it's anything to do with eye pokes. It might be PTSD. He's lived through that nightmare. He's lost his vision to it. And every time someone takes a finger to the face, he basically short circuits. He starts talking over his co-hosts, arguing, contradicting. He just needs to relate it to him, and getting defensive like the ref himself just jabbed him in the eye. And John Gooden trying to provide context, and Michael Bisping's trying to relive his own trauma and play gladiator bard at the same time. Broadcast evolved into what could best be described as two British men having a heated domestic in front of millions of fans. And look, again, I get it. It's probably absolutely deafening inside that arena. Bisping is feeding on the chaos. He's like a dog that's just happy to be on the ride. And John Gooden's, the guy's actually driving the car, gripping the wheel while the wheels are coming off. And like, he is good at his job. He just also gets extremely excited. And British people are annoying. And despite being a great broadcaster, John Gooden is still fucking British. So, it's like two opposites. Obviously, you're going to get this to happen, and you get two British people calling a fight in fucking Brazil, okay? And so somewhere between professionalism and absolute pandemonium, they lost the thread. And in that microcosm was the whole card. UFC Rio felt like an exorcism. The old guard crumbling in full HD. The veterans, the names that carried the sport through the late 2010s, early 2020s, they all felt like they had been coded out in the current meta. And Luque wasn't just losing, he was symbolically retiring mid-fight. And if you track his numbers, since 2020, it tells very much the same story. From 2020 to 2021, Luque goes on a 5-fight win streak, 4 finishes, a KO of Woodley, 2 Darce chokes. If you bet on him 1 unit in every fight, you'd be up 5.8 units. If you took him on the inside the distance prop, you'd be printing 3-to-1 tickets almost every single time he wins. Then from 2022 to 2025, the cliff, an 0-5 stretch, absolutely hemorrhaging, 7.1 units on the money line. The inside the distance line, it's extremely expensive, but the conversion just completely vanishes. His value is flipped into what is now just an absolute liability. And Luque has very much become like the archetype of too tough for his own good. The kind of fighter who used to reward your faith, but now it punishes it. And that's the problem with the Henry Hooft system, because Henry Hooft builds strikers who thrive on precision and pressure, but the whole architecture depends on youth, timing, and confidence. And then there's no plan B. You either bully or get bullied. And then once the body starts to slow down, it collapses. Like you just fall apart. And look at his roster. Michael Chandler, all heart, no defense, swinging himself into neurological bankruptcy. Vitor Belfort, cosmic highs followed by cosmic naps. Luke Rockhold, chin betrayed. Even Anthony Rumble Johnson, God rest the dearly departed. He burned bright under Hoof's watch before fading under pressure. Because there's a pattern here, and it's not of failure, but of stagnation. Nobody evolves, nobody pivots. Luque was supposed to be the exception. He was supposed to be like the smart brawler, the one who'd balance chaos and composure with his, MMA jiu-jitsu. And instead, he became the perfect case study in what happens when coaching worships aggression, but never learns retreat. And Henry Hoof's mantra of hard sparring, forward pressure, it very much worked in the old UFC ecosystem, the one run by attrition. But now in 2025, the overall meta favors adaptability systems. Like the It's fighting systems that win, not just vibes and heart and going out there and hoping that your forward pressure makes your opponent wilt. And that's the thing. It's vibes. Like Hooft is literally just selling vibes. That's why this hurts, because it's not just a loss, it's a death rattle for that type of philosophy, because the sport has completely moved on. The welterweight class is now run by tacticians, not by gladiators. And Luque wasn't just defeated in this fight, he was made obsolete. And when the fight ended, the judges turned it in 30-26s across the board. And everyone sort of just exhaled like they watched a mercy killing, because that's what it was. Alvarez barely even celebrated like a man who'd conquered something. He just nodded and shrugged and clocked out because he knew he'd beaten a relic. He turned him into a relic like mid-fight. And yeah, the real wreckage definitely lays cage side, with Henry Hooft just staring blankly, the commentary team bickering, the referee wandering around like he misplaced his commission license. Like, you couldn't script a better metaphor for the old guard of the UFC being just completely decimated by a new guard. And yeah, and again, like, I'm going to give Bisping a heavy dose of criticism, because that broadcast meltdown was absolutely embarrassing. But, and it pains me to say this, there is, again, a sliver of empathy that's warranted, because as everybody knows, British people are annoying. Like, John Gooden is a pro, but he's also aggressively British. And he also really loves the rules, you know? And Bisping, meanwhile, he's just chaos incarnate. He's half commentator, half court jester, and entirely too excited to still have this job. And, you know, probably not suited for it in any way. Probably a running joke in some circles that he's on this payroll mostly to ward off some type of lawsuit. And honestly, that's probably not wrong. So yeah, Bisping derails the broadcast. The ref in this fight completely loses the plot. Henry Hooft has proven once again that he's completely finished as a coach, and Luque became a cautionary tale. But the fight itself, it was very much the natural end of a market correction, because welterweight dogs are going to bark. We're going to continue to see the welterweight dogs perform before 2025 is over. But this one was just a dud. And this one got muzzled fast. Luque is the last romantic fighter in the division that knows that romance is dead. And he's the dog that bit until his jaw came out, right? And Yoel Alvarez is the man with the plan. And he just put that old era to sleep right in front of us. All right, now let's get to the bright part of this card, because Deiveson Figueiredo gets it done by split decision, 29-28, 29-28, 28-29 over Montel Jackson. The Figgy money line cashes at plus 280. The decision prop hits at an insane plus 550. He's now up plus 6 units since 2020 on the decision prop. And on a night that was mixed with nostalgia and arithmetic, Deiveson Figueiredo walks into Rio as a live dog and walked out as a reminder that some legends don't fade. They just reconfigure. And it's funny, because watching this fight, I couldn't help but think about, it's almost been 5 years. 5 years ago, me and Bleed were sitting on the post show talking about Figueiredo, talking about Charles Oliveira, two Brazilian finishers who made betting on this sport feel like roulette with lightning. Like, I just remember locking those inside the distance props and let the skull gods decide, because it was that version of Figueiredo which was the closest picture of the flyweights. You know, he came in to end your night, no doubt about it. But this guy in 2025, he's still cashing, just playing a different sport. And if you followed Figueiredo since his title run, you know the lines tell the story better than any highlight clip can. Because from 2020 till now, his inside the distance prop, once the go-to moneymaker, have cooled off all the way down to minus 3.7 units. But while that chaos has died, consistency has taken over. Because like I said, the buy decision prop plus 6.6 units, and his money line returning just over 5 units in that same span. So let that sink in. We're talking about a fighter known for breaking people, now making money for playing it safe. The market hasn't caught up because everyone still pictures that the flyweight psycho who blitzed Joseph Benavidez twice, submitted Alex Perez in under 2 minutes, and fought Brendan Moreno 4 times. But the truth is he's flipped the script because the God of War is now the accountant of Rio. Because you could feel the tone from the first exchange of this fight. Jackson came in long and sharp, throwing some straight punches and testing the range. He did not manage to maintain that range because you saw it. Like I think he might have been expecting, Montel Jackson might have been expecting the old Figueiredo to come through, because the old Figueiredo would have bit down and swung until someone blinked. The new Figueiredo, he measured distance, he picked his spots and timed his level changes. He hit some slick takedowns, those inside trips, flowed into control. He never chased a finish that wasn't there. Round 2 for him was textbook, veteran composure. Figueiredo pressured, struck with rhythm, and mixed his grappling in beautifully. He opened up Jackson with body shots, dragged him to the mat, advanced position. But again, always with caution, no overcommitting, no gas tank gambles, just points on the board. And the third round was the margin round, the kind that defines this new era of MMA, because Jackson needed chaos and Figueiredo needed composure. And guess who got their way? The Brazilian picked his spots, chopped at the legs, threatened just enough to freeze Jackson's offense, because that at that point, that range testing and that Jackson just he could not get on his bike in this fight if his life depended on it. And when the final horn sounded, you could feel it. The old chaos of Figueiredo was still in there. It was just, again, domesticated. The split decision was noise. Maybe I got blinders on, but the truth was in the result. This fight wasn't it's in no way some type of return to glory. I'm not saying that, but this is a clinic in sustainability, right? Figueiredo's always been the kind of fighter who lives between extremes. But what we're seeing now is the middle ground, the survival mode that great athletes find when that fastball fades. In his prime, Figueiredo was a starting ace, throwing 100 every inning. He'd strike out the world or gas himself out trying. Now, he's an off-speed pitcher who wins on placement, deception, and timing. And you can see it in every exchange. The bursts are shorter, but they land cleaner. The scrambles are slower, but he's smarter. He's using his body like he's deploying his resources better. He's figured out how to win rounds instead of how to win wars. And it's no accident that the betting data tracks this exact arc, okay? The inside the distance prop, those fireballs, they don't land like they used to, but the by decision angle is the curveball. He learned to throw it after the arm started breaking. And the beauty of it is that he's still getting hitters out. He's still cashing. He's still doing what he's doing to without blowing his shoulder up, without blowing his knees out. And aging out of flyweight might have been the best career move he ever made, because bantamweight looks good on him. The extra pounds don't slow him down. His power probably didn't move up to bantamweight, but he's still such an athlete and such a high level at this weight class, world class. I don't know if he'll ever, fighting for the title is a different story, but he's got a lot of miles on him. You can see it in his cardio, the posture, the composure. It was a 3-round fight, but still, like, he's no longer killing himself on the scale to chase the ghosts of his youth like he was, 3 or 4 years ago. Getting down to 125 at like 33, 34 years old was probably literally fucking killing him. But now at 37, Figueiredo looks like a man who can still fight another 3, maybe 4 years at a very high level. And not just hang around, but win. Like, prize fighting isn't always about titles, right? It's about staying profitable. And that's what he's doing better than almost anyone from this era. Beating Merab, obviously a tall order, which I don't think he could do. Merab's cardio algorithm, disguised as a human, is kind of untouchable right now. But against the rest of the division, Figgy still matches up absolutely fine. He's compact, he's dangerous in transitions, and now fights like someone who knows exactly what the judges are watching and what he's also capable of doing. And the Figueiredo arc here feels like a blueprint for long-term bettors who follow the pattern, like not the hype. When Figueiredo was Canos incarnate, he paid out on the flash. Now he pays you out on patience. Moneyline bettors, plus 5 units since 2020. Decision bettors, plus 6.6 units since 2020. Inside the distance chasers, down 3.7 units since 2020. And yeah, that's wild. Since 2021, he's only has one finish, and that's the Cody Garbrandt finish at UFC 300. Pretty wild. This is a guy who, you go back, you look at Perez, he finishes Perez inside the distance like a minus 200, finishes Benavidez inside the distance like minus 125. Then he finishes Benavidez like the back in 2020 February the first time plus 300 on inside the distance. Fight before that, he finishes Elliott first round plus 170. So this is a guy who four straight finishes, then runs into, that's really what it is. Four straight finishes, like a wild run, runs into Moreno, and then that he really came out of the other end of the Moreno fight series very much a different fighter. I still think he's one of the top bantamweights in the UFC. It's just interesting, like you don't see that kind of long-term data back profitability in fighters who live off moments. You see it in veterans who adapt. He's not just fighting smarter, he's fighting sustainably, like as a whole. And there's a quiet confidence to that kind of a career. You can almost feel him saying, I don't need to prove that I can kill you. I just need to prove that I can still be here. And my skills alone show that. And I don't know, I don't mean to be romantic about Figueiredo, but it just hit me. It wasn't even that great of a fight, not even that great of a performance, but I just thought plus 280, man, Figueiredo's going to come out. He's going to style. And he looked good. He looked good enough to win. And it really hit me during the walkout how different this felt from those early Figueiredo nights, right? Like I thought back to the post shows with Bleed, like both of us losing our mind over how, Figueiredo was just redefining chaos. And it's been almost 5 years. And Figueiredo and Oliveira, they both evolved into something so much more measured and mature and human. Like Figueiredo used to be this just like wild fever dream, and now he's an elaborate quandary. He's the kind of fighter that you can still profit off of if you know how to read between the stats. And that's what made this fight and this win special to me. It wasn't vintage violence, Figueiredo. It was an earned, controlled win. And it was a man who finally learned to survive his own legend. And every fighter hits that point where they have to choose burn bright or burn long. And Figueiredo's chosen the long game. He's still the god of war, but now he fights like a god who understands mortality, measured, aware, dangerous as hell, but smarter with his chaos. And the best part is he's still a bet worth making. He was plus 280 in this fight, and the numbers prove it. The tape confirms it. The line still undervalues him because it remembers what he was, not what he is. So when I look at that split decision in Rio, I don't see a fading star. I see a profitable veteran who's finally optimized his style for his body and his career for what's ahead, what he's capable of. And he's still got a name. He's still got fights to fight. And I bet you he will fight for that title at least one more time. This is his refinement. He's no longer the starting ace throwing heat. He's the crafty veteran painting corners, stretching the innings, racking up those quiet wins. And if you've been betting him right, you've been winning right alongside him, and you're just as excited about him as I am. And if not, you probably said it wasn't a great fight. All right, now let's get to the main event. Charles Oliveira closes at around minus 105 on the money line against Mateusz Gamrot at UFC Rio. The over-under here sat at about 1.5 rounds, juiced to the under, and anyone who took the violent side cashed easily. And we are back on track. Another profitable night for the cult of Du Bronx. Since 2020, Charles Oliveira is up 4.5 units on the inside the distance prop, 5 units on the money line. One of the most consistently lucrative fighters in the UFC of all time. And that's the math. But the math doesn't ever explain Charles Oliveira. Because at 248 of round number 2, Oliveira submitted Gamrot with something between a rear naked choke and a neck crank. A violent gray area of technique and pain. Gamrot tapped, the crowd absolutely detonated, and Oliveira knelt in the cage like a man reborn. And this wasn't just another win. This was absolutely a redemption. After being absolutely flatlined by Ilia Topuria early in the year, the narrative was that Oliveira was cooked, that the division had moved on. But in front of his home crowd, Charles Oliveira reminds everyone that chaos still has a master and that master still carries weight. Gamrot was supposed to be the algorithm's fighter, you know what I mean? Pace, wrestling, cardio, volume, the kind of machine built to break people coming off a knockout. But Charles doesn't break like other fighters. He bends the rules of physics and psychology until you're the one that's panicking. And that's exactly what happened, right? Gamrot came in with the plan, shoot early, drown him with pressure, but how sharp was Charles Oliveira? Feinting guillotines, slicing elbows off his back, staying calm through those scrambles. You could feel the tension really shift because by the end of the round, Gamrot's face was marked as shit, and Charles is already just walking him down. And round two was the inevitability, right? Like that's when you started to see Oliveira push forward, his shoulders square, chin tucked, that just the look of determination on his face. You could just see that it was an inevitable for him to get there. Gamrot shot again, and Charles just absolutely floated with it. Reverse position, slid the hooks, closed the vise. Again, not an explosion. It was a slow, suffocating death. And when Matus Gamrot tapped, it was like the crowd could feel the exhaling of all that doubt, because that's what makes Charles Oliveira special for fans, for bettors, for his supporters. He's not a streaky fighter. He's cyclical. Every time the market fades him, he comes roaring back. Every time they price him as an underdog, he reminds you why the chaos is worth betting on. He's been cashing tickets since before the pandemic card, against Kevin Lee in the empty Brasilia arena. He's cashed as an underdog against Chandler, against Poirier, against Gaethje. Now is like a coin flip against Gamrot. The only consistent losers with Oliveira have been the odds makers trying to contain him. Again, since 2020, Oliveira has been walking value. He's just been a walking value anomaly, plus 4.5 units on the inside the distance prop because he mostly doesn't do decisions. 5 units money line because the underdogs with elite finishing ability pay the rent. He's a rare fighter who's both a chaos engine and a consistent moneymaker. And in the era of MMA analytics with win probabilities, control time, distance striking metrics, etc., Charles Oliveira is living proof that the numbers don't always tell the story, because you can quantify a fighter who walks through fire with a grin and determination, but you can't model someone who gets stronger after being dropped. And the Ilia Topuria loss was supposed to be the end of the movie for Charles, but instead, Charles turned it into the start of another act. Why end when you can begin? And that's why bettors keep coming back, because with Charles, you're not betting on numbers. You're betting on faith. That's been, all this talk, like all the talk that I've had in this entire episode about changing of the guard at lightweight in the UFC with Brazilians. But the truth is, in relation to Charles, on this night, it was Oliveira's guard that stopped any changing of the guard from taking place. His jiu-jitsu isn't just defense. It's a system of traps that are like layered like a booby trap cathedral. He doesn't just survive off his back. He hunts. He breaks posture, isolates wrists, land elbows, and builds submissions through chaos. Like, you can't rest in his guard. You can't breathe in his guard. And that submission is just classic Charles Oliveira. Not clean, not academic, but unstoppable. That's his gift. He blurs the line between technique and instinct. His guard isn't just a position. It's an ecosystem that eats confident men alive. And in a night about transitioning and about changing of the guard, Oliveira made time stand still with his guard. And once Charles feels your power, once he decides you can't hurt him, he's got to be one of the scariest fighters of all time. Because at that moment, that's when the fight is over. He turns that forward pressure into a hypnosis. He becomes the scariest man not named Ilya in this division, marching, smiling, daring you to shoot. And will he ever be able to do that against Ilia Topuria? Probably not. But he could maybe game plan his way to victory. Absolutely. By, look at this version of Charles, the one that picked his spots, managed risks, and fought with purpose. I feel like can beat anybody at 155. He's not going to just rush in like he did the first time because he knows it's not going to work.
So he'll probably do something better and different. He doesn't need to walk through fire every time. And if he brings a mix of patience and precision, he can probably burn the whole division down completely methodically. Apart from Ilya, and I would give him still, like, if you're giving me plus 280, or if you're giving me if you're giving me plus 300, plus 250 on Charles against Ilya, I'm still taking Charles. It doesn't. And I doubt they'll ever fight again, but who knows, really? But if we ever get that rematch, it won't be the same story. It will be a disciplined Oliveira hunting, not trying to prove that he can stand and go toe to toe. You'll see a much smarter, slicker, surgical fighter, the kind of Charles, the version of Charles that we saw tonight, the one that you can build a title run around. And absolutely cannot undersell this. Charles Oliveira is one of the greatest resumes in MMA history. 23 UFC wins, 21 finishes, 17 submissions. Absolutely absurd. Legacy math that it's just unprecedented. He's beaten 4 former champions, finished 3 of them, and given some of the wildest fights in lightweight history. I don't think I've ever had any more fun watching. Like, it's the night after the fight, and I'm still giddy. Like, the adrenaline rush that you get from watching Charles Oliveira fight, it gets you every single time he walks to the cage. More than that, he's the soul of this era. Like, we are lucky to have lived in the time of Charles do Bronx Oliveira. And, when we see him in the cage, with his family, with his infant child, flag in hand, his entire family and team behind him, it just hits different because it's not nostalgia, it's renewal. Charles Oliveira is still do Bronx, still chaos incarnate, still the most electric mix of violence and vulnerability that we've ever seen. And for the betters and believers, the fans, he will always keep delivering. 4.5 units on the inside the distance prop over the past 5 years, 5 units on the money line in that same stretch. Count them out in your own peril. We'll see you, we'll see you in March, Max, and then maybe rematch with Ilya. Who knows? But on this night at UFC Rio, the guard didn't change, at least not for Charles, because it bowed. And Charles Oliveira pulled time itself into his guard, squeezed, and reminded us that there is no stat, there is no metric, no model, no next generation that can replace him. The numbers crash, the myth grows, and for one more night, the sport belonged to Charles do Bronx Oliveira. Still do Bronx. So that's UFC Rio. The numbers tell a very clean story about this card. Favorites went 8-4. The under went 8-4 plus 6.64 units. Fight goes the distance no went 9-3 for plus 5.32 units. UFC Rio, the old cathedral of chaos, finally learning rhythm, because under the spreadsheets and the stack trackers and everything that I do to prepare for these events, there's still the pulse of fighting. And you can throw the whole book out when you watch guys like Oliveira, guys like Figueiredo, because betting on this sport is just like the modern way in which we remember, because it's, on the ledger is how we grieve, how we archive, how we pretend we've made sense of something that was never supposed to make any sense. They were supposed to just absorb. And UFC Rio was very much that. It was a card of endings and beginnings and renewals. We saw the new wave rise as the old guard bled. The odds stabilized as the stories around them unraveled. Oliveira walked out smiling like he escaped his own myth. Figueiredo was overstruck with emotion when he had his hand raised, because he probably knows there won't be many more like that. And Vicente Luque stared through the lights because he could probably feel that the future he imagined has already moved past him. And somewhere in the spreadsheets and the prop sheets and the betting slips will keep their ghosts alive a little longer, counting, calculating, and remembering, because that's what we do now. We don't worship the chaos anymore. We track it. We call it variance, return on investment, expected value. But behind every percentage point, there's still a heartbeat of the thing that started it all: belief and love for the sport of mixed martial arts. Because the sport will always find its equilibrium, but the soul of the sport, that can never be replaced. Thank you for watching.